Excuse me. Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about that Ohio State-Oregon game, and Andre had a comment here. I do think there's a lot on Ryan Day. It's not to say I'm taking any pressure off Ryan Day, because you got to win these games. No two ways about that. It just more felt like a lot of the issues that they had in this game had a little less to do with Ryan Day. Obviously, it all comes back to the head coach, and they very much have to deal with those things, but I don't know. This wasn't necessarily a indictment on Ryan Day, at least in my estimation. There's obviously a number of things at play, and at the end of the day, whenever you lose one of these games, it's going to be an indictment on Ryan Day in one way or another. But I don't know. I don't think that was quite as bad as the Michigan losses of past or a couple of the other ones, but definitely something that's open to interpretation, and I'm sure some Ohio State fans very much agree with you on that front. But let's get over to the LSU and Penn State games, because these were incredible as well. Somehow we don't have enough time to get to all of the incredible games around the country, but this one was awesome. It was absolutely incredible to watch these teams on the field, and frankly, I think it was one of those games that really set up well for LSU, because it proved to LSU not only can you beat a team scoring 50 points and they score 45, and you can't only beat a team, making sure you get one pick late in the game and that's the end-all be-all. They kind of slugged it out in this one. And now there were big plays, don't get me wrong. There were plays by Caden Lee. There were plays by Trey Harris before he went down. But the reality is, if this is the defense you're getting from LSU going forward, there's a lot of things that they can do. Very, very much bend, don't break. I believe Ole Miss got into the red zone 3 times, only got a touchdown, or only got a field goal once. So really dominant stuff from LSU. Really did an incredible job. Blake Baker was absolutely in his bag in this game, and I think it's one of those things that now LSU's kind of on the races. They're doing things that I think a lot of people after week 1 especially did not peg them to be doing, but they're kind of turning a corner a little bit. As for Ole Miss, this was the year. This was everything was pushed into this year. A remarkable transfer portal class that has ridiculous amounts of talent. Third-year starting quarterback, weapons all over the place, and injuries have played a part in that, but everyone's injured at some point. So it's October 14th, and they are essentially out of the CFP race. Now, they do have games coming forward. They could win out and still be in the hunt, but the reality is Georgia's coming to town in a couple of weeks, and as of right now, I would very much lean Georgia. But who knows what happens the rest of the way. Maybe they run the table and sneak in the back door. But on the other side, LSU saved themselves. There was a moment there where it looked like LSU's season was crumbling around them. And frankly, if they had lost that game, they got A&M coming up, Arkansas. They have a couple other games that it could have gone sideways in a hurry. Now you have that confidence, and now you can move forward into that Arkansas game this upcoming weekend. Then you go to Kyle Field for a big game against Texas A&M. You go 2-0 there. They're very likely in the playoff. If they take care of their business the rest of the way, they're very likely in the playoff. Now, you go 1-1, then you probably got to beat Alabama. So we'll figure out what happens going forward, but LSU did the thing that they needed to do, and that's just save their season, get that 1-point win, and keep moving on. But how LSU won was absolutely huge. I think the biggest one to me was Garrett Nussmeier is as resilient as any quarterback I've seen. And frankly, it was far from a perfect game. It was all over the place at times. The first half was not nearly where he wanted it to be, but he made big plays down the stretch. He made every single throw you needed him to make in that fourth quarter. They had 84 yards rushing on the day, so a lot was going to be put on his shoulders, and he answered the bell. He was really, really incredible in this one, and one of those reasons that I love LSU so much throughout this year is this guy can make all types of plays if you give him a little bit of time to work with. And then defensive game plan for LSU was really, really good. This Ole Miss offense is, I think everyone knows, it's Trey Harris or pretty much no one else. Now, Caden Lee stepped up in a huge way later on in that game when Trey Harris went down, but seems like they're funneling it to one receiver. It seems like, at least in the past game, it's relatively monotonous, and Blake Baker took full advantage. It was 6 sacks, 6 hurries, and they were all over Jackson Dart. And then got huge turnovers. Whenever they needed them, they got some big ones, and it's a difference in this Ole Miss or LSU team being really, really good and being on the fringe or being outside of the CFP. Having a defense that doesn't have to play great, doesn't have to play dominant football, make a couple of picks, stop them in the red zone, and you'll be in really, really good shape going forward. And then finally, Ole Miss's discipline was just not there today. 12 penalties, 110 yards. It's one of those things that when you're playing a game in Death Valley at night, you cannot give them mistakes. You are not going to win if you give them the number of mistakes that Ole Miss did, and that's the way it went down. So a huge win for LSU, puts them in a really good place, and where they go from here, I think Ole Miss, you're not out of it. You have every ability to run the table, get into the CFP, make everything that you wanted to happen, but This was not the plan. I can promise you that. The plan was to be undefeated after this game and rolling towards the Georgia game undefeated and feeling great about what they can do, possibly being the number one team in the country. That was the plan for Ole Miss this year, and it's fallen a little bit flat. But the reality is it's going to be really interesting to see what this team is the rest of the season. There's rumors around Lane Kiffin to Florida. I won't necessarily put a lot of credence into that until, we get real rumors around that, but it'll be interesting to see how this team responds, to see how they bounce back, and the leadership on that team with a lot of transfers is going to be tested very, very quickly throughout the rest of this year. And then for Ole Miss, this was as big of a win as they could have had. I think at the beginning of the season, LSU probably looked at their schedule and said, okay, Alabama's going to be a really tough one. We're going to have to deal with that. USC is going to be a really tough one. We're going to have to deal with that. And this one is going to be really tough. You got to be able to get one of them. And Ole Miss was the one that I think they were circling probably more than anyone else. They were able to get it, and that's absolutely huge. Could not be more impressed with this defense. It's not perfect by any means, but if you got that pass rush, if you have Weeks playing at an all-SEC level, you're going to be more than fine. And then the back end is really coming along. Not necessarily elite by any means, but Zy Alexander made a big play. You had P.J. Woodland making good play. Ashton Stamps was all over the place. So a lot of good things happening at LSU, and I think that defense is coming along a little bit faster than I expected it to. But as I said, the next 2 weeks are huge at Arkansas, at Texas A&M. You win those two, and a lot of things happen in a hurry for LSU. Then we got Penn State, USC, and this one, I don't know how USC lost this game. I'll be totally honest with you. It was one of the weirdest things I've ever seen in my life because it's what USC is at this point. And it's very, very odd to watch every single week. They play a really, really clean first half. They're throwing the ball around the field. They're doing a lot of really nice stuff, keeping things off pace. Woody Marks was absolutely rolling. And then Penn State comes out of the halftime and just tears them to pieces and wins this game 33-30 in overtime, comes back in a blink of an eye in the second half. So a lot of stuff to go into with this USC and LSU team, but cannot be more impressed with this Penn State team or LSU, Penn State and USC teams, but could not be more impressed with Penn State. I think it's one of those games that it's easy after the fact to say this USC team isn't real. It's not that big of a win for James Franklin, yada, yada, yada. This was huge. Going all the way out west, playing a team that is going to be able to make your defense work for it, is going to be able to stretch your defense out and make life tough for you. Getting that win is huge, especially the way that this thing started. Drew Allard played not good football in the first half, played probably one of the worst halves I've seen him play in a while, and then he came out in the second half, the first two drives, 8 for 8, 155 yards, a touchdown on 2 drives in the second half. He was incredible. He did exactly what he needed to do, and frankly, I think that's the biggest development I've seen from him, where you can have a game where everything goes wrong in the first half, you regroup at halftime, and then tear him to pieces. And that is exactly what he did. He's one of those quarterbacks that he's won in all types of ways this year. He's won by tearing just from the jump, just going off on a team, which is West Virginia. He won a game in Illinois that just had to take care of business. They had to take care of the ball, not do anything crazy, and they were going to win that game. This one started really slow and then took off towards the end of that game. So really, really incredible stuff from Drew Allard. Cannot be more impressed with his progress throughout the year, and I think he's one of those guys that could be as dangerous as anyone going forward. But I want to get to something here really quickly that really kind of made me mad, weirdly enough. I'm not a USC guy. I don't necessarily care about the game, but the handling of that last drive for USC was just coaching malpractice. I have no earthly idea what what Lincoln Riley was thinking in that moment. I have no earthly idea how they were going to go about business. They had the ball on the Penn State 49-yard line with a minute 27 left. They ran 3 plays during that time before the end of the game. Loss of 2 yards on a run, pass out inbounds for 6 yards, and an interception. How does that happen? And I understand Lane Kiffin said, you don't want to give him another possession. Trust your guys. You have every ability to throw the ball. Miller Moss is a very, very good quarterback. And yeah, if you get yourself into trouble, then you'll live with that consequence. But the idea that you have yourself on plus territory with a minute and a half, only needing a field goal to win a game, and then one run of a loss of 2 yards totally changes that is insane to me. So Lincoln Riley's got to figure that out. I don't know if he doesn't fully trust these guys the way that he should. I don't know what the situation is, but the idea that he was fully content to go to overtime in this game instead of letting his guys get a chance to win in the regulation is just insane. It was a wild, wild misuse of that last couple of minutes, and it cost his team the game. But moving on to how Penn State was able to get the win. Oh, before we do that, I did want to give a shout out to Julian Fleming. On that final drive for Penn State, he made 2 catches that were absolutely remarkable. 17, 16 yards on 2 fourth downs that they very much needed. Drew Aller put a ball just on a dart, and he made great catches. So, frankly, there was a little bit of worry about that pickup going into the season, not necessarily getting on the field quite as much as you want. That more than made up for picking him up in the portal. He's been a really important player, although not getting the ball quite as much as people kind of expected going into the season. But moving on to Penn State, how they were able to get this win, the toughness late was really incredible. And it's something that has kind of been a theme around USC's games in the last little bit. The toughness on one side is much greater than the toughness on the other side. They had a field goal from USC in the end of the third quarter, field goal from Penn State, touchdown from USC right after, responded right back. So the ability to just say, we're going to take hits, we're going to take punches down the stretch of this game, got to get back up, got to be able to execute right afterwards. Really good stuff from this entire Penn State team. And we got to talk about Tyler Warren. This was incredible to watch. And frankly, I don't know how he kept getting open. I have no earthly idea how USC was not picking him up literally the second he left the line and not leaving his hip pocket. And frankly, they did do that a couple of times. Didn't necessarily matter. He did have a play where he snapped the ball and then caught a touchdown. I don't know how. I don't know why that's a play call in the book, but Andy Kotelnicki got in his bag and it really worked for him. And Tyler Warren made a ridiculous catch. So that's a huge player for them. I think one of the things that I would worry about is you don't want to put too much on your tight end. You want to be able to spread the ball out a little bit more, but at the end of the day, he did plenty in this game, did everything they needed him to do, and they get out with the win, and now you can probably spread the ball out just a little bit more going forward. And then a huge swing at a halftime. This was a game that, frankly, if USC was able to get out at halftime, score a touchdown, this thing would have been over. It would have been, I believe, 27-6, not much that Penn State was going to be able to do. Penn State came out 2 drives, 2 touchdowns, 13 plays, 165 yards, and just 6:42 in game time. And then USC added the drive in between, 5 plays, 27 yards, a punt, and 3:36. So it was domination. They got right back into this game very, very quickly when it looked like they had nothing going offensively. They exploded in the second half and did incredible things. But where do they go from here? I think for USC, you are who you are at this point. It's not necessarily a bad person because the reality, or bad team, because the reality is the defense has gotten a lot better. You're playing a lot better defense. You're playing much more physical. You're doing a lot of the things that USC teams didn't do in the past couple of years. Doesn't change that this is frustrating. A lot of USC fans looked at this year as a chance to kind of burst onto the scene in the Big Ten, make some really big plays. Beating LSU first week gave them a lot of hope, but the reality is you're just not quite there personnel-wise. You don't have the big bodies up front that you need to. You don't necessarily have the guys on the back end to be able to cover one-on-one with a lot of the wide receivers you're going to face. It's going to be tough to deal with. That's the reality. It was always going to be a long rebuild. I understand Lincoln Riley's in his 3rd year there. I would argue he's roughly in his 4th year, because for his fault, to be totally fair, because he made the wrong defensive coordinator hire, but the reality is D'Anton Lynn's doing really incredible things over there. I think they'll be fine. It's just going to take a little bit more time than USC fans would like. And then for the Penn State side, this is huge. It's absolutely massive. James Franklin was getting very close to having another little can't win the big game moniker on his resume. But at the end of the day, get the win. It's huge for this team's confidence because you just proved to yourself that you can get knocked down, you can get punched in the face, and come back from a very, very deep deficit. So absolutely incredible. I think Drew Aller was one of the more impressive things about this game. He was very, very bad in the first half and then was able to flip the switch, which was the big one worry I had about him going into this year is how does he respond to that adversity again? Because he didn't respond all that well last year, was incredible in this game, cannot wait to see what he can do the rest of the year. And with Ohio State losing, it looks like Penn State could be the higher-ranked team when Ohio State goes to Penn State in a couple of weeks. Now, Penn State's got to take care of business, but the reality is, really, really incredible game in a couple of weeks. Cannot wait for that one, but huge win for Penn State. Puts them on a really, really good track for the CFP. Even if you lose to Ohio State and you're on the outside of the Big Ten title, you're in. No two ways about that. So an absolutely huge win sets them up for a lot of success going forward. USC, the season didn't go the way you wanted. No two ways about that. But the reality is, this offseason was always going to be the time when everything started to shift. we'll see what happens then. Obviously, a very frustrating start to the season, and I tend to believe it's going to be pretty frustrating to end it, but the reality is this is a very solid team moving in the right direction, just need one more offseason to really get it all into place. But let's take our second break here, and when we come back, we got to get to a couple of teams that escaped with wins. Alabama, Tennessee, and even Kansas State a little bit escaped with some wins and got some big wins going forward the rest of the season, but we'll talk about some of the struggles for those two teams right after this, so stick with us.